Hello everyone, welcome to a video about a living legend of jazz guitar, Russell Malone, and a solo he played on the standard East of the Sun. Let's go! In my previous video I talked about the same standard, East of the Sun, but then it was a solo played by Peter Bernstein, and I will put a link to that video in the description. Now, Peter Bernstein played that solo during a live concert with the Diana Krall Quartet. But the original guitar player for the Diana Krall trio or quartet or bigger group is, of course, Russell Malone, and he recorded many solos with Diana Krall, and all of those solos on all those albums, I think by now they are classics. I've heard them many times. I can probably sing most of them, and today's solo is a wonderful example of that. It's the one he recorded on East of the Sun. And it's very interesting to see because we're talking about the same arrangement, same tempo, same group, but different guitar player, and they have very different ways of navigating the quite tricky changes of East of the Sun. And that's why I thought it would be really nice to, after doing Peter Bernstein, also look at Russell Malone. So let's start with phrase number 1. This first phrase is a beautiful melodic phrase, and immediately we can find a difference with Peter Bernstein, and I will be referring to that other solo as well, just because it's so interesting to see the different approaches that both work great. So instead of ignoring that B minor E7 like Peter Bernstein was doing, actually Russell Malone really embraces that different sound, that really contrasted sound with G and then B minor E7. In fact, he treats the B minor not as a inversion of G like in the previous video, but instead as a 2-5. And he goes a step further, he ignores the 2 chord, the B minor, and immediately goes to E7. So Russell Malone is thinking G major 7 for 2 bars, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, E7. So let's look at the phrase itself. It starts out with emphasizing the major 7, which is an F sharp on G, right? So you could almost say it's just an F sharp with embellishments. Everything he plays always ends up on that F sharp. And after that, he makes it no secret that he's thinking E7 by immediately going to the 3rd of E7, G sharp. He plays the 3rd and the root. That's unmistakably E7. And I think it works really well. In the previous video, I was discussing the most common options for the first 4 bars, but I actually didn't talk about this option. I didn't even think about it, but it's a great option. Just think E7 for 2 bars. So you think G major 7 and then E7. Instead of thinking G major 7 for 3 bars, and you kind of ignore the B minor, you still play G major, and then 1 bar of E7. Both options work great, but I think this is a very colorful option that you should definitely use to make some contrast with maybe the other choice, especially if you intend to play multiple choruses and you want to have a different kind of flavor on these first 4 bars. Then I think going immediately to E7 is a very colorful way of doing that. Let's go to the next phrase. This is a great phrase, connecting A minor to C minor, and I talked about that before. It's pretty difficult to make a connection. Instead of just playing a line for A minor, and then kind of stop and play a similar line on C minor. I mean, that works fine, but this way of connecting it with a continuing line, that's really beautiful. And now this phrase that he plays on C minor, to me sounds like F7 sharp 11. So if you have an F7 chord, and I want to have the sharp 11 in there, I would have to have a B in there, so it sounds like this. And the line that Russell Malone plays really conveys that sound. Starting with, that really sounds like F7, because both the F and the E flat is in there. Sounds a little bit like Hansuk Rose. Right? And then he goes, now this C sharp is a peculiar note, but it's a color note. I would say that this line is kind of an enclosure, an embellishment for the sharp 11, for that B. So I wouldn't put too much harmonic emphasis or explanation on that C sharp. It's just a nice color note. You could have also played, but that's much less interesting. I think that C sharp really attracts your ear. It's very ear-catching. That's a really great line. It's maybe one you should learn to play, especially on East of the Sun. Let's go to the next phrase. By now you might be wondering, wait a minute, I've heard this solo, but I don't remember it being in G. And that is correct. I transposed the solo to G from B flat, just because normally you play this standard in G in a jam session or even in a gig. The only reason it was played in B flat, I guess, is because it's Diana Krall's vocal key. And it's a great key, don't get me wrong, but I think it's nicer to talk about this solo in the key of G because it's mostly played in that key. And I also did that with the solo of Peter Bernstein, by the way. Phrase 3 consists of a couple of great licks, great lines. Starting with this line based on the C major 7 arpeggio. That's really C major 7. And if you play a C major 7 arpeggio on top of A minor, you get the 9 in there. That's the note B. Wonderful sound. And then he continues with a quick 2-5-1 lick to E minor. So it's F sharp half diminished, B7 to E minor. We get this really great line. That is a great quick 2-5-1 lick to learn, to practice in multiple keys. And that slide is important. And don't be too quick with the slide. You can take your time. Just slide one fret, but make it a very pronounced slide. He continues. And this is a great line for A7. Especially because it ends on a really colorful note, which would be the 13, right? But also because of the C sharp here. Now you might say, well, that's a normal note in A7, but I really like it because in the line before, he also plays this C sharp. So we already have this really special note in our ears, and then when you play it again, you get again this kind of special flavor, even though it's a normal note on A7. That's something that kind of stood out to me when I was listening to the solo, when I was transcribing it, that C sharp having this kind of emphasis. Also notice that those last F sharps are not played on the beat. It's not... I might have been playing that right now, but actually those F sharps are delayed. 3, 4... And I've written that down exactly how it sounds in the triplet rhythm, but it's difficult to read just play that first F sharp later than the beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That kind of delayed feel. You don't have to really count it out. It's more of a feeling it. So listen to the original solo as well. It's linked in the description. Listen to me playing it and try to just play along until you get that rhythm right. Let's go to the next phrase. And here we have a beautiful original 251 lick, and I would say it's a typical Russell Malone sounding 251 lick because of the smart and motivic use of chromaticism. I mean, it just sounds great. The resolution to G is beautiful to that major 7. But remember, on E minor, he also resolved to that F sharp with the slide. That went like this. And now we have... So just like that a C sharp that is being emphasized, here we have an F sharp with a slide being emphasized on 2 different chords. It's a beautifully constructed solo, if you could say that. So it's not that, I don't mean that it's written solo, but I mean that he's very aware of the usage of certain notes, and he makes an effort to use that note again, but on a different chord, but having that same emphasis, and that way you're really telling a story with your solo, and I think that is what is happening here. Now something very interesting happens. In the previous video I was saying that you have to be careful with that C sharp on B minor. But I was saying that in the context of if you want to convey a G major sound. So I was saying if you have 2 bars of G major 7 and then 1 bar of B minor, you could choose to just have a G major kind of feel throughout those 3 bars and treat that B minor like a G with a B in the bass, like this sound. So you would play some G major line. But then you have to be careful not to play a C sharp, because if you do that, the moment you start playing a C sharp, it sounds like B minor. I said that. And I was saying that because you shouldn't do that in the first 2 bars for sure, because if you do that in the first 2 bars, it sounds like you're playing in B minor, even though the chord is G. But of course, if you do that on the 3rd bar, like it's happening here, then it's completely valid, because now what you're doing is telling the listener, listen, I'm going to a B minor chord. So here we have the same idea as in the first part of the solo, where he went to E7 straight. He's trying to really convey a different color. So don't stay on G major, instead play another color. So in the first half it was E7, and now he chooses for B minor. I don't think you could be any more clear that it's B minor than playing those 2 notes. If I would play this, you might think, well, that's even more clear because now you're playing the 3rd. But actually, if you play these 2 notes, it still sounds like it could be G major 7, because then it would just be the major 7 and the 5th of G. But if I do this, that C sharp can only be one thing in this context. It's the 9 of B minor. So that's the best note to play if you want to have a B minor feeling there. Another thing to notice is the motivic use of rhythm here. Right, the resolution to G is this rhythm. It's a quarter note followed by an 8th note, and then another 8th note which is connected to the next beat, 3, 4. And now the same thing on B minor. 1, 2, and 3. Somebody actually said on Instagram when I posted the solo, it sounds very logical. It does sound very logical, and it means that the solo sounds like you're telling a story, even though it has nothing to do with the original theme of East of the Sun. A lot of people say, why all these jazz musicians, they're playing just random stuff, has nothing to do with the song itself. But that's not the point of a jazz solo. The point of a jazz solo is to have a internal logic, right? You want to play a solo that tells a story by itself. You're just using the same chords as the theme. Now, you could use the theme as a starting point or come back to it. There's nothing wrong with having your own lines, making up your own lines, playing your own licks, as long as you try to find some motives in there. It could be a melodic motif, or could also be a rhythmic motif, or could just even be one note that you're emphasizing on different chords. Maybe you add a slide on that note, or you have that note just be featured in some melodic lines. And those are the ingredients that we find in this solo. And that is a very hard thing to achieve. That takes years of experience and listening and playing jazz. That was it for this solo. Of course, there's more to the solo. There's a second half, and I will make a video about that, especially for my patrons over at patreon.com. So if you want to check that out, go take a look. There's several tiers. If you join there at the €5 tier, you can download the tabs that you saw on screen today. But if you join at the €10 tier, you can get access to the exclusive video I'm going to make later this week, but you'll also get access to a bunch of other exclusive videos. And there's even a highest tier, I think it's €35, and you would get access to everything on my Patreon. And I'm talking about hundreds of videos and hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of tab. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon, and hopefully I will see you in the next video right here on perhaps on my Patreon. Bye. Hello everyone, you just listened to a jazz guitar solo on the chords of the tune Ergin. If you are a guitar player and you always wanted to play jazz but had no idea where to start, I have a solution for you. I just released a book called The Van Hemert System, which describes the system I used myself to learn how to improvise, like you just heard. The methodology is completely based on learning a couple of shapes across the guitar neck that will enable you to improvise on every jazz standard you can think of. Of course, it's gonna take a while to become proficient at playing those shapes and how to apply them, but you don't have to learn anything else. No music theory, no scales, no arpeggios, no fretboard identification, no ear training, just learning those shapes and how to apply them. That's what I did myself, and you just saw the result. If you are interested in learning to play jazz guitar like that, and you are in the US, order my book in the web store of jungleguitars.com. And if you are in Europe, send a mail to this email address. Bye.